uniquely, the one cause that you cannot go and protest, according to the police, on a Saturday at the BBC, is for the rights of the Palestinian people to be recognised, and right now for a genocide to be ended.
We've reported on quite a few of the UK's national marches for Palestine over the past year and a half. But why has the UK's Met Police tried to ban the next upcoming protest, which is set to take place this Saturday outside the BBC? The proposed route for this protest has been done several times before with little to no problems. So why did this one in particular cause such a fuss? Some pro-Israel groups, MPs and the chief rabbi raised objections to the Met Police that the proposed route strays a bit too close to some of the synagogues in the local area. One of which is about a 5-minute walk just a few streets down, but the protests and where people gather don't usually reach that far back. So in response, more than 700 British Jews, nearly 200 MPs and human rights organisations, including Amnesty International UK, rejected the police ban on the Gaza ceasefire march, due to take place this Saturday. So we spoke to Ben Jamal, the director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is part of the coalition that leads these national marches for Palestine. And this protest comes as serious negotiations for a ceasefire are set to be announced. A ceasefire that these protests have been pushing for all along.
With this particular protest, we for some time have wanted to go back to the BBC. It's a well-established sort of route of protests. BBC, Whitehall, Whitehall to the BBC. But there's a particular reason. It has been a growing issue since Israel unleashed its genocide on the failure of the BBC to report this in an unbiased fashion. We first put this to the police in October, and we wanted to do it on our march in November the 30th. And the police said, look, this is a very difficult day because the day you've chosen is one of the busiest shopping days of the year. Oxford Street, Regent Street are going to be particularly crowded. It's going to create major disruptions for us to close off those roads. Could you reconsider? And we said, okay, we will agree not to use the route on this occasion. We'll use it on January. Please go and consult with the business community. So we don't want to come back in January and be told, no, it's also another very, very busy day, etc. We want to do one or the other. They came back and said, no, January is definitely preferable. We reached an agreement that we would march in January. We said to the police, we are going to announce this on November the 30th, unless you come back to us and tell us there's any further problem that you need to negotiate with us so we can get it out in the public domain. Nothing came back. We put it out. And people started to make arrangements. Just before Christmas, the police said, would you consider another route? And we said, what are you talking about? We've done a deal. We've announced it. This is the first time we've used this route for over a year. What's the problem? They said it's going to disrupt the Jewish community. There's a synagogue in the vicinity. We don't go past it. It's not on the route. It's several hundred meters on a side street north of the BBC. We don't assemble there. We don't march past it. But it is going to be disruptive. And we said that what's the evidence there's any threat to that synagogue? What is the concern about the synagogue? Now, what they said to us was they accepted there was no evidence of a single threat to a synagogue emerging from any of our marches, despite some of the rhetoric that's been put out in the public domain. Not one single instance of anyone going to a synagogue, protesting outside a synagogue, threatening a synagogue, stopping people going into a synagogue. Absolutely no evidence. What the police said was pretty extraordinary. What they said was, we don't have to have evidence. If people tell us they feel harassed, then we have to deal with that. Now, it's a nonsensical argument. And I said, if I say I'm a Republican and I feel harassed whenever the royal family process through the streets of London, and it makes me feel unsafe, are you going to take that seriously and say, okay, I'm going to go to the king and say, I'm really sorry, but you've done this a few times and it's really upsetting certain members of the public. Could you stop? Of course you're not. And you need evidence, don't you, to demonstrate this. I think it's worth saying something about the synagogue in question and the rabbi in question. The rabbi of the synagogue that is closest to the BBC and who the police have made clear has been one of the people saying, I feel unsafe and my congregants feel unsafe. Now, his evidence, he says, in one of the demonstrations and the disruption, he said twice he's had to put back services to prevent, delay them to prevent the service taking place when we're there. He's not provided any evidence anyone's tried to go to the synagogue, harass people, etc. But he said we can hear them chanting genocidal chants inside the synagogue. Now, what does he mean by genocidal chants? He's talking about people chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So the argument is we're inside a synagogue. We can hear this in the background. We know there are people with Palestinian flags, etc. That's harassing. But I think it's worth saying something about this rabbi's positions, his political positions. This came to light yesterday and was covered by Navarra media. He has published sermons on the synagogue's website. He delivered a sermon in which he attacked Keir Starmer. He's entitled to do that. But he attacked him on the basis of calling him two-tier Keir. He said that the government effectively and the policing that enforces is unfairly hard on the far right, but has another rule for those on the left. He's accused the BBC of being horrendously anti-Israel. He's criticised the United Nations and says, and the International Court of Justice, and the decisions made by the International Court of Justice, and saying these are lies, that the UN and the ICJ are just peddling lies. Most notoriously and shamefully, I think, in a sermon, he quoted Golda Meir, a really appalling thing that Golda Meir notoriously said about the Palestinian people, where she said, we'll have peace with the Arabs when they love their children more than they hate us. And he's also talked about the need. He has said that basically we need to go on the attack against our enemies wherever they exist. Let me give you the direct quote. It is time to go to combat our enemies, not only on the battlefield, but the hostile press, those on social media, the UN and governments who have no desire for truth or peace and seek the destruction of Israel. What that demonstrates, the police are taking evidence from this person with egregious views like that as a good faith actor who's informing them that they have to prevent Palestinians, people protesting for the rights of the Palestinian people from going within any sort of distance of his synagogue, regardless of whether he's got a service on or not. So that began a sort of torturous process. Last week, the police announced they were going to place conditions to prevent us with our initial plan, which was to assemble at the BBC, march to Whitehall. We therefore decided what we're going to do is, and the condition they put in place effectively says at any point on Saturday, we can't be at the BBC. Now, what we decided to do, we'll reverse the route. There's a reason for that. Why? I mean, actually, it doesn't matter to us whether we begin or we start at the BBC. The point is we want to incorporate a protest at the BBC as part of this demonstration. And we want to either start also and finish at Whitehall, the seat of government. They wrote to us and said, we're not allowing this. This would be in violation of the restrictions. The restrictions are in place all day. And gave us a variety of reasons, but the central one was you are going to prevent Jewish people exercising their right to worship. It's a threat. It is about harassing the Jewish community on the Sabbath. Now, they also raised an objection that where we proposed to hold an end rally at the BBC was a space that they thought was too small to accommodate lots of people. So we went back to the police yesterday. What we said to them, first of all, our point of arrival at the BBC will be 3 o'clock. The Sabbath service finishes at 1 o'clock. We do not accept any argument that there's any threat to the synagogue, but let's leave that aside for a moment. By what stretch of the imagination does people arriving at a location 2 hours after a service has finished at a synagogue several hundred meters away prevent people attending their service? Also, the police are saying to us, these restrictions we want to put on you going forward only exist on a Saturday. You can go to the BBC and protest on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Sunday. And what is abundantly clear that's going on here is the police have yielded to pressure from the political establishment, including, unfortunately, senior leadership figures within the Jewish community, who from the start of these marches have tried to prevent them, on the argument that they are supportive of terrorism, they're hate marches, or they're making the entire city of London unsafe for Jewish people. That hasn't worked. So now we have a new variant, which is let's try to narrow down on synagogues and see if we can construct an argument that people are being prevented from going to synagogues without any evidence that anyone's being threatened or harassed. But I think on a view that people will feel, well, of course, people should be able to go to worship. It's a really dangerous, spurious argument. What it effectively means, and we clarified this with the police yesterday, we said, let's be clear on our understanding. What you are effectively saying to us is that the people who want to protest for Palestinian rights can no longer do so at the BBC on a Saturday. Anybody else can go there and protest on any other cause. If I want to organize a pro-Israel demonstration, I can go to the BBC on a Saturday with no restrictions. Uniquely, the one cause that you cannot go and protest, according to the police, on a Saturday at the BBC is for the rights of the Palestinian people to be recognized, and right now for a genocide to be ended. That's an extraordinary situation. And the police effectively just shrugged and said, well, yeah, that's the situation. Absurdly, to see what we're dealing with here, they said, we absolutely respect your right to protest at the BBC. Here's a suggestion to you. Why don't you go and do a small protest on the Friday evening? Of course, it wouldn't be a big national protest, and film it and show it to your crowds on Saturday. I mean, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that point, saying, you seriously putting that suggestion forward and with a straight face telling me you want to preserve our right to protest at the BBC. So this is a really disgraceful situation. Well, since all of this came public, let's deal with the latter first of all. We've had an extraordinary response of people in agreement with us who say this is actually also a fundamental assault, not just on the rights of those who want to protest for Palestinian people. This is a fundamental breach of the basic right to protest. So we had a letter signed by, I think we're now up to about 180, what you might call the great and the good. Politicians, trade union leaders, 14 trade union leaders, leaders of organizations like Amnesty International, Liberty, Greenpeace, a body of lawyers, academics, and then cultural figures, Paloma Faith, Kneecap, Brian Eno, Charlotte Church, so a whole range of people who said this is wrong. This is not the way we should be conducting our business in any sort of democratic society. They've been joined by a separate letter. I think the tally now is certainly yesterday, it was well over 800 of Jewish people who say, actually, we want to march. We have regularly marched on these demonstrations. We want to say not in our name, and we want to say that those within the Jewish community, the chief rabbi and others who are expressing straightforward pro-Israel positions. The chief rabbi has publicly campaigned against a ceasefire. He's said that what Israel is doing is the most noble thing that any nation can do. He has talked about, described the IDF as our heroic soldiers. So they're saying you do not do that in my name. So they've also put out public statements calling for the police to shift their position and saying they intend to march with us on Saturday. We are calling for people on Saturday to assemble at Whitehall. We will march towards the BBC. Between now and then, we are asking for the police to recognize the absurdity and the grotesqueness of their position and back down, so that we can finish in the way I've suggested at the BBC. If we can't, we'll finish where we are able to finish.